of the important parts of this session is to understand what your role is if you believe that there is domestic violence in the home of the family you serve, whether you know that for a fact or you're not sure. So one of the things that I would always say is keep in mind, here's where we are and here's what's important for you. Be knowledgeable and concerned about domestic violence. Maybe take into consideration the history and severity of family violence when making some placement recommendations. Now, when I say that we want to take into consideration the history and severity of family violence when making placement recommendations, that does not necessarily mean we're going to exclude a family just because there's been domestic violence, but we definitely want to make sure that we've recommended and the court's done a domestic violence assessment and that the aggressor maybe has gone through some anger management or there's a batterers intervention program, which sometimes you hear called BIP, BIP, and so those are some of the things that you're going to want to see happen first prior to potentially recommending reintegration for that family. This is why it's really important to be knowledgeable and concerned about this and aware of it. We definitely want to always be focused on what is in the best interest of the child. If they are at the beginning of the journey, it might not be in the best interest of the child to return the child home quite yet. There might need to be family therapy so that that child can then work through the trust issues that have developed from the domestic violence that has been in the home, especially between two major caregivers. It might need that the child needs to have some individual therapy, and then they start together and work it through some of these issues in family therapy before you move to recommend reintegration in the home or whatnot. We want to make sure that we're always aware and to seek out resources from Children for Violent Homes. We definitely are going to want to be pushing therapy big time because we need to make sure that they deal with that trauma and then are able to move beyond it, and that is going to definitely take some therapy. And we always want to recommend help and therapy for the parents in this situation as well, whether they have been the aggressor or the sufferer. Either way, they both need some help for varying reasons. All right, so let's move away from domestic violence for just a minute. And let's talk about what challenges you, because this is a really important thing for us to all be aware of as well. I said for whatever reason, domestic violence is a topic that tends to have an emotional impact on trainees and peers alike for whatever reason. And so it is important to be aware of that. So you may be in a case that you feel. I know that when I sit down with our volunteers, we're doing a little bit of it back and forth. Excuse me one. Ask is there a case that you would prefer to work on? And I have some, well, I have teenagers. I would love to have a case that has teenagers. Or, I've got a family member or friend or someone that I know of or a coworker or whatever who suffered substance abuse. And so I'm very aware of that. I would love to have the opportunity to help a family with that since I have this extra knowledge about this particular. And then sometimes have people say things like, well, I would really prefer not to have a teenager. I have teenagers in my house right now. I need a break from teenagers. Or they say, I have a family or a coworker who has suffered from substance abuse, and I really don't think that I want to deal with that. I'm really aware of it. It would just be too much for me because of that personal relationship. And it's funny because those 4 examples that I gave you are 4 different people who have sat in my office at one point in time and told me those exact same things. And I always find it kind of tickling me in the back of the, is like, just because you know a lot does not mean that that's going to be a good fit. Some things are going to be more challenging. And I so appreciated every one of those responses. Not because it made a difference in whether or not they could be a volunteer. It made a difference in the kinds of cases that I would ask them to volunteer for and be connected with in one way or another. I, like my counterparts in other programs, we do not want to assign any volunteer to a case that's going to challenge them in a way that it could be painful or hurtful for them. The cases are challenging enough. We don't need to add to it. So we appreciate that information, and please always be that kind of honest with us. We know that we have some biases sometimes, but based on our values or how we think things should happen or our cultures, and those are some of the things that we talk about a lot, and we're learning about, culture and different things like that. It's really important. This is where we have to really recognize what our biases are and try and learn to set them aside to advocate for that child and therefore that family's best interest. I will tell you, one of the biases that I have is I always have the expectation, I guess, is what I would like to call it, that parents are going to want to do what's best for their children. They're going to put their children first. And that's not the reality in the world. There are a lot that don't value children as much as I do in my brain, or as I think they should, because they're the parent. They should be putting their child first. But that's not always the case, and that can be for a variety of reasons. And so that's a bias that I have when I walk through. I am very aware that I do not have a bias when it comes to if the parents are split, whether the children should go with mom or dad. I really don't. I'm only looking at the best parent for the child, so it's an easier role for me. But like the first one, I have this expectation that parents are going to want what's best for their children. Unfortunately, I get disappointed sometimes. So let's pause here for a second and think about that. Think about what your biases are and values, and then think about, is there a kind of case that would challenge you? Is there a kind of case you would prefer to have or not to have? Because that's definitely a conversation you want to have. Now, I'm going to say about this, there is a case that we're going to talk about, and we will spend a lot of time in the next session on session 5 talking about the Amarillo case. And so I will say that this is one of those things, pay very close attention to the email that I sent about what I would like to have you have printed and read or not read for that case. Now, we are going to move into permanency and some other things, but before we do that, I have some things that I need for you to read. So if you will finish watching this video and then go ahead to the next section of reading.